Hi, everybody, and welcome to Beyond the Cage. I am your host, Jim Gramm. Alongside me is my co-host, Dave Sadler. And as Bruce Buffer says, we are live, and we will have 5 rounds on the show Beyond the Cage. Inside of round number 1, of course, we will go over headlines. Inside of round number 2, we're going to do a little Bellator review of Season 10. And in round number 3, we will break down the main card of UFC 173. In round number 4, we're going to pick the main card fights for UFC Fight Night 41. And in the 5th and final round on this week's show, we will pick the main card fights for the Ultimate Fighter Brazil 3 finale card this Saturday. Again, I am Jim Gramm. Alongside me is Dave Sadler. And Dave, we are live. So live in person. How are you doing?
I'm giving a shout out, if you can see my headwear, to all the graduates out there.
That's right. A lot of people are graduating from high school today, or their last day, and probably a lot of the ceremonies will be this weekend. I can think back. It was just 7 years ago for myself, and I believe it was like 15 for you, Dave, something like that, 20?
Oh, yeah. I actually... Wait, hold on. Wait for it. Oh, where is it? Oh. Jim was trying to be funny, folks. No, I actually just graduated not too long ago because I went back to school after the Marine Corps. Anyway, no, it's good to be live. Hopefully there's 20s of 30s of people watching us live. Send us some Facebook messages if you have any questions that we can hit up during the show. But, yeah, let's get into some of these headlines. I have a few opinions on a few of them.
Yeah, and of course, Facebook page, facebook.com/BeyondTheCagePodcast. You can also send us your tweets. We will be available on Twitter. I'm at Jim Gramm, and of course, Dave is at Vigilante Juice. So we got our phones, we got technology to hit up on Twitter to see them. So don't think we won't see them or anything. So
hey Jim, real quick,
yes.
before you start, I was just curious, are the headlines in round number 1 brought to you in part by anybody that's on my wall?
I believe they're brought to you by our good friends at VigilanteMMA.com, and you can follow them on Twitter at VigilanteMMA.
Yes, you can.
And of course, as everyone knows, the show is brought to you by Fight Chicks, and of course, I'm displaying the Fight Chicks Ronda Knows T-shirt today. So got that out there as well. All right, our first headline here for round number 1. Let's talk about somebody Fight Chicks knows and somebody Dave knows pretty well, and that's one Ms. Kat Zingano. And over the weekend, Dana White has come out saying that Zingano will not be guaranteed a title shot upon her return to the octagon. She has been out over a year after defeating Miesha Tate on the Ultimate Fighter finale card for Season 18. She has been undergoing rehab on her knee. Now she is set to come back to training pretty soon. And Dave, even though you and I want to see Kat get her shot, we think she is deserving of a shot, I actually think the best thing for her is to have kind of a tune-up fight to make sure her knee is 100% and make sure she is fully back to what she was before the injury. And I think that would be nice to kind of test things out in a fight where there's not so much pressure on her.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree anymore. Dominic Cruz was out for like 400 years, and all we kept hearing was that when he came back, he was going to get a title shot. He's been through so much. He's missed out on payday after payday. Because remember, Dominic Cruz was scheduled to fight Uriah Faber, I believe, on one of the Silva cards, or one of the Anderson Silva cards, or one of the John Jones cards.
It was the Super Bowl card. He was supposed to fight Barao.
Right. But I think it was a fight before that, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, Dana said he gets pay-per-view points, and he missed out on a ton of money. Well, Kat beat Miesha Tate, was supposed to be the coach on The Ultimate Fighter, which gets her worldwide recognition. Their fight was the co-main event of UFC 168, the one in December, the Anderson Weidman, which she would have made a ton of money on. Kat put a quote on her Twitter page not too long ago. If you're in the game of gold, fighting for bronze means absolutely nothing. And the only person, no matter who she fights, the only person that has anything to lose is Kat. And I don't like it. Shouldn't it be Kat's choice? If Kat feels like she needs a fight, let her take a fight. But if she feels like she can beat Ronda, let her have the shot. Let her have it now.
Well, I think when and or if Dominic Cruz is going to return again, I don't think it's going to be for the bantamweight title. I think it will be just a regular fight. I think the UFC is pretty safe, and that's what's going to happen. And if you remember, Dave, when Frank Mir got hurt many, many years ago after that motorcycle accident that got him stripped of his heavyweight championship, when he came back, he didn't fight for the heavyweight championship. He had several fights before he got a shot at the heavyweight title, a title he never lost. And I think that's the only difference between, you look at Mir, you look at Cruz and Zingano, is the fact that they had the title and they should get a shot because they were the champion. Whereas in Ngano's case, she wasn't the champion. She just simply got enough credit and enough fame and, you know, got the victories and however you want to say it. She got enough to get a shot at the title, or what should be a shot at the title. It's not like she was the champion or anything. And I think that's the only difference between her and Dominic Cruz. Now, I see your point. She got the shot. There's not that many other ladies right now who are, in my opinion, deserving of a shot at the title. So I can see it from that standpoint. But if she took a fight, her next fight against Ronda Rousey, let's say she lost really bad, and she probably won't use it, because she seems the type of person that's not going to use some type of injury or anything, circumstances, as an excuse. But you know, a lot of people are going to be like, well, she lost because of her knee. If her knee wasn't like that, maybe she wouldn't have lost to Rousey like that. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people will use, and I think that's what the UFC is afraid of, is having a really bad fight because she wasn't 100% and they put her in there too quick.
Are they afraid that she's going to come in and beat their cash cow that is Ronda Rousey?
There is also that, and that is something that you and I have talked about several times, that if Rousey loses, what happens to this division? And that is something you and I have talked about several times. I mean, does the whole thing come crashing down? You know what I mean? It's something that you and I have it's kind of like when Fedor was fighting. When was it all going to come crashing down? And it's kind of a very similar type of situation.
Yeah, the news was out there. Dana said it, and the guys at Vigilante put an article up, and there was a nice little argument going back and forth. And I want Kat to get the shot. Let me throw this at you, Jim. Renan Barão, who we'll talk about in a little bit, 2 years ago, not really known. That's fair, right? To say that he wasn't a really known quantity.
Yes.
Okay. 2 years ago, not a lot of people knew who Kat Zingano was. The hardcores knew who Kat Zingano was. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that this time next year, Kat Zingano has the Renan Barão treatment. That she has the ability to come back, destroy Ronda, and then be the greatest woman's mixed martial artist. You know how Barão just kind of came out of nowhere? I think Kat Zingano can kind of do that same thing 1 year from today.
Well, let's move on and talk about a couple of recent fight announcements, or I guess one is still being worked on, but it looks like it's all but signed on the dotted line. And let's start first with the fight that is officially signed, and that's going to be the main event for UFC on Fox 12, which will be in San Jose, California on the 26th of July. It will pit Robbie Lawler against Matt Brown, and also it looks like it's going to be the main event on UFC 177, which will be the end of August. John Jones, Alexander Gustafsson 2 for the UFC light heavyweight championship. And I guess Gustafsson has already signed the fight and signed a contract extension. Jones has yet to sign the bout, but it looks as though that fight's going to take place. So just first, Dave, you go over the Matt Brown Lawler, and then you can transition into the title fight.
Hey, Jim, are you talking about this Lawler?
That would be him.
Yeah, this is the 2004 knockout Matt relic. Just thought I'd throw that out there. They're sitting by my desk. No, I like the Lawler and Brown. And much like Steve said from Vigilante MMA, Andy's my brother, much like he said, the welterweight division is amazing. Matchups are just I mean, there's guys that are going to be fighting later 2 fights away from title shots that are amazing. But, man, Robbie Lawler and Matt Brown is going to be a short... I don't expect it to go very long. I think the longer that this fight goes... You know what, Jim? I was going to say the longer this fight goes, the more that I think Robbie Lawler has the chance. But I don't even know if that's fair. As we saw, Matt Brown got caught early last time and came back hard and was victorious. But, yeah, I like this. Whoever gets this will have plenty of time to rest up and take Hendricks on once Hendricks is fully recovered. So good for the UFC to put this one together, and this will get people talking. It'll be good for the numbers with Big Fox. And Jones-Gustafsson, too. It's hard to live up to the first one, but I think that these two can deliver. And I'm not going to lie, I'm going to pull for Gustafsson just because I like how it screws up all the plans. Because you know the UFC after this is clamoring for Jones versus Cormier. So come on, Gustafsson, screw up those plans for him.
And on the Lawler and Brown matchup, definitely a tremendous matchup. Should be a very excellent fight. And the winner most certainly gets themselves a shot at the welterweight title. Of course, I know Woodley and McDonald are fighting, so that will be one contender to fight Hendricks. So presumably the winner of Lawler and Brown will fight whoever comes out of McDonald, Woodley, and Hendricks. That's, I guess, the game plan. And like you said, it's probably going to be a brawl between Lawler and Brown. I don't expect anything else. So the winner of that fight will probably need some time to rest before their welterweight title shot. I mean, they're going to have to wait anyway, so you might as well wait because you got banged up pretty bad. So that's definitely a very interesting fight. We'll break down the fight when it happens in July, but it's kind of like the one-shot knockout power of Robbie Lawler versus the just relentless onslaught of offense that is Matt Brown. I mean, again, let's not forget, he threw like 150 strikes landed before he finished Eric Silva. So,
didn't he have 150 significant strikes?
Yeah, something like that too. So, I mean, Robbie Lawler, you know, that's the thing. Matt Brown's going to throw, it's going to be, will his volume outweigh the power? And that's what makes it a tremendous fight. And that's not to say Robbie Lawler can't put up, you know, ridiculous numbers, but Matt Brown's known for that. That's what he does, and it just makes for an exciting fight because, you know, neither guy is going to go for wrestling. It's gonna be on the feet. It's going to be excellent. And like you said, Jones and Gustafsson, that was arguably the fight of the year last year. Will it be that good the second time around? I don't know. You know, who changes things? You know, what changes for both guys? I mean, that decision was so razor thin that if that exact performance happened, it could go to Gustafsson. I mean, that's how close that fight was. I mean, it was just a matter of perception, and really the only difference I see being in the second time around is Gustafsson knows what it takes to go 25 minutes in a championship fight against John Jones. He knows that now. It's not an unknown quantity anymore. And if he gets his conditioning right, because it just looked like he kind of ran out of gas there, I just don't see how he doesn't beat John Jones. You know, I mean, he has enough now to do it. He knows what to do. And I think for John Jones, the pressure's still on him. I don't think it's on Gustafsson at all. Like, he has to go in there and deliver because, yeah, he beat Glover. Yeah, he was better than him. But nobody was like, oh, my God, John Jones just, like, you know, ran through Glover. He knocked him out in the third. It wasn't anything like that. You know, it was just being better than that guy. And I don't know right now if he's better than Gustafsson. I mean, he's a slightly better because he beat him, but it's a very interesting fight, and I like the fact that they booked that right away after the Cormier fight because For all the immediate rematches we've seen the last 5-7 years, Dave, the fight should have already been booked. First of all, Gustafsson and Jones. So I like the fact that they booked it and go, Dan Cormier, your victory, we'll talk about in a minute, was impressive. You know, you manhandled a guy who's a legend of the sport, but you're going to have to wait.
Jim, we have our first question for this week's show.
All right, let's get to it.
Yeah, I'm on. I have my Facebook and my Twitter up, and of course, our question comes from a member of Team Genesis, which our friend Doug Keese is the coach of.
Alrighty.
Comes from Thomas Gonzalez. Here's the question. Dave, you think Rousey and Cyborg would ever happen? And if so, what's the outcome? I know we've talked about it before. I don't think it'll ever happen. It's going to have to be at a catch weight, and I don't think Ronda has a desire to go to a catch weight. I don't think Cyborg can get down. If the fight got to 135, if Cyborg could get that low, I think that Rousey would kill her due to the fact that I think the weight cut would be way too strenuous for Cyborg.
At 145 or some type of open weight, Cyborg wins. There's just no doubt about it. She's a beast. But at 135 pounds, the fight might be booked, Dave, but I don't think it happens because she misses weight so bad that it doesn't happen. I really think those are the only two options. That's the only way I see it playing out.
Do you think we see Cyborg in the UFC? That's an obvious follow-up that they'll probably Facebook in.
Do I see her in the UFC? No, because I don't think they're going to add a 145-pound class. They'll add a 125 before they add a 145.
All right. Thanks for the question, Thomas. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, with that, Dave, let's move on to round 2 here on Beyond the Cage, presented by Fight Chicks. And inside of round number 2, we're going to talk about Bellator Season 10. We're going to talk about the highlights. We're going to talk about the lowlights. We're going to talk about what we didn't like, what we thought was good, and all the things that involve this past season of Bellator MMA on Spike TV, and of course their first ever pay-per-view, which culminated season number 10 here. And Dave, as we look over the 10th season of Bellator, let's start first with what we liked. And if we look at the tournaments here for season number 10, we had quite a few tournaments. We had them in the 8-person variety, and we also had them in the 4-person variety, as we had a 8-man featherweight, lightweight, welterweight, and heavyweight tournament. We also saw a 4-man light heavyweight tournament and a 4-man middleweight tournament. Now, of the tournaments that were actually completed, Dave, we saw the featherweight tournament get completed. We also saw the middleweight tournament not get completed. The welterweight tournament wasn't completed. The lightweight tournament not completed. The light heavyweight tournament was completed. And the heavyweight tournament was also completed. So that's about, what, like 50-50 there?
No.
On the rate. So I would say that's a negative right there. That's a low light. The fact that less than half of your tournaments didn't get completed in the season. Now, I know some of that's beyond their control, but some of that's just bad scheduling, Dave.
Yeah. Bellator Season 10. I told you when I saw it live that the welterweight tournament was the best tournament. It didn't finish, which, like you said, scheduling was more of a Bellator issue than like fighters pulling out or whatever. We've talked about it way too many times. Man, I don't want to sound like a jerk, but there's really not a lot that Bellator did in Season 10 that I'm like, that's great. The tournament that you did complete was the 4-man light heavyweight tournament, which oddly enough got you 2 of your biggest stars in the main event of your pay-per-view. I mean, that's, looking back at it, that's probably why they only put 4 people in it, because they knew that they could get the turnaround that much faster. They didn't have to go through the extra fights. And fight fans are crazy, Jim. Do a lot of fight fans care that the season is over and that the tournaments aren't done? I don't know. But to me, you started something, your season's over, but there's still like that carrot that just dangles out there. Like, what happened? Because think about it. Can Bellator do a season 10 review before their next show starts? Not really, because the season's technically not over. It's just, we said it 600 million times, Jim. A lot of small mistakes add up over time, and I feel like season 10 was a lot of small mistakes.
Well, looking at the 3 tournaments that finished, like you said, the light heavyweight tournament was one of them, and we'll kind of glaze over that just because it was a 4-man. But of the 2 8-man tournaments, you had the heavyweight tournament finish and the featherweight tournament finish. And even though we're not a fan of Bellator having the heavyweight division, I think of the 2 8-man tournaments, I would say the heavyweight tournament had a lot more excitement in it than the featherweight tournament. Now, the featherweight tournament, opened up, I thought, pretty solid, but then because Weichel and Green were never really that exciting, the 2 guys that ended up in the finals, and really up until Weichel then put that finishing move on Green in the second round, that was a pretty boring first round. So really the featherweight tournament, I don't know if it was the worst featherweight tournament ever, but definitely not a great overall tournament in terms of excitement and prestige and all that jazz. And the heavyweight tournament probably lacked the names that even the featherweight tournament have, and ended up being pretty good. But again, it was kind of no surprise that Alexander Volkov goes in there, wins the 3 fights, and gets another shot at the heavyweight title.
Jim, when you said the featherweight, I'm on Bellator.com and I just clicked on it. Do you realize that we watched Diego Nunes and that Bissett guy? We watched that at the Arnold together in Columbus, and the tournament just ended 2 weeks ago. Doesn't that feel like forever ago?
It does. That was definitely a long time ago. And I mean, going back to that night where we watched that fight, again, we're fight fans. We're trying to watch fight. We're all in the mood of watching MMA because we had been at the Arnold, and that fight didn't really deliver that night. You know what I mean? There really wasn't anything that... I mean, the Bissett fight was good, but that was probably the best fight of the whole tournament, I would have to say.
Yeah, and I mean, this is what I'm talking... Is there a reason that fight was Friday, February 28th, and it ended May 9th? They had all of March, all of April, and then that was their second show in May. I mean, that's 2.5 months to get that many fights in. That's where they're running into problems, I think.
And yeah, like I said, the heavyweight tournament was good. Volkov wins. Maybe not surprising a lot of people. He gets another shot at Minkonoff. And for the tournaments that didn't finish, and I guess you would call those the lowlights, right? The tournaments that didn't finish. You were really high in the welterweight tournament, and for what we saw of the welterweight tournament, Dave, it was pretty exciting. But again, this tournament not only marred by scheduling, but injury / the flu. Then we had a weight issue with Sam Opereza where he had to go out, so Justin Baseman, a journeyman fighter, had to come in and fight, the uber-talented Andrei Korzhakov, who, let's be honest, pretty much just got a free pass into the finals against Adam McDonough, and who knows when that fight's going to take place. I don't know. So, we'll find out when that happens, but, that wasn't all their fault, but from what we saw of the welterweight tournament, I think you were right on, Dave. That is probably the best tournament we've seen so far.
Yeah, Jim, when you said that, you said the Korzhakov going to the finals, and it put a question in my head, and then I just left. Oh, man. You need to stall for time while I rethink this question. Darn it.
All right, well, we are live, so let's look over that welterweight tournament. Korzhakov definitely will probably be going in the favorite. I mean, he's had 2 fights, both of them first-round finishes. Now, McDonough's looked good. He got by Juarez by decision, I believe, and then he was able to knock out Nathan Coy, a very tough competitor. But neither of those guys have done what Korzhakov has done so far in Bellator in the world of MMA, and neither of those guys, I don't think, are at the skill level of an Andrei Korzhakov. And I think you've mentioned several times McDonough's a guy that pretty much just fought regionally, I think in Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken,
Correct.
And was brought into Bellator, and Bjorn was like, this kid's talented, but what can he do outside of Minnesota? Well, so far he's 2-0 since leaving his home state, winning 2 fights in a Bellator tournament. Now he takes on Andrei Korzhakov, who has looked unstoppable, with the exception of one fight, and that was against Ben Askren, who is a top 10 welterweight in the whole entire world. So it's a very, very interesting fight, because if you're a betting man, McDonough's going to be a heavy underdog. I just don't see how you can't put Korzhakov a favorite or a heavy favorite, because you have to. He's just been that electric inside the Bellator cage. So it presents a very interesting matchup, and really whoever wins, I think, presents a very exciting matchup with Douglas Lima in the near future.
Yeah, I can go with that assertion, Jim. My thing is, I think the finals will be good. I don't think that either one of these guys wins against Douglas Lima. They put up a fight, but I don't think either one of them beats Douglas Lima. If anybody's looked unstoppable recently, it's that guy.
Yeah, yeah, he's looked pretty good. So yeah, I would, regardless of who comes out of it, yes, I would favor Douglas Lima, but it definitely should be an interesting fight. And speaking of really low lights, I think the middleweight tournament was probably the low light of Season 10. Not only was it only a 4-man tournament, which I don't really like. I like the 8-man tournaments. I think they make a lot more sense. But you thought you had some big names in here. You know, you throw in Brett Cooper, you got a Kendall Grove, and you get to a point where you had Cooper and Grove, which you could make a case was the fight of the season, Dave. That was a very excellent fight. And then you had Dan Kramer, who was supposed to be in it. His opponent missed weight, so they tried to give Kramer somebody else, and once again, this would have been like on a day's notice or 2 days' notice. Kramer said he didn't want to do that, which I don't blame him. So Bellator then kicks him out of the tournament, basically, says, well, you know, that's our solution to this problem. If you're not going to take it, well, you know, we'll have to come back to you next season. So they throw in Brandon Halsey against Joe Pacheco. Halsey wins a mediocre fight against Pacheco, so now he's in the finals against Brett Cooper. That had to be delayed because Cooper got hurt, and they could have thrown in a whole bunch of other names to replace Cooper and have Cooper just fight Shlemenko, enacting the rematch clause instead of make Cooper fight this fight. Like, I don't know, let's say a Brian Rogers, or I don't know, maybe you call Gavin Kramer. You know, like, it just seems there's so many things they could have done with this tournament, Dave, and it just turned out a disaster. And now you get Brett Cooper against Halsey, and I really don't think Halsey has much of a chance winning if, you know, he fights Brett Cooper.
Yeah, I think that much like you said for Korzhakov, I think Brett Cooper can walk right into the finals, and then yeah, he can walk right into the finals against the undefeated world champ in Bellator that just got beat by a light heavyweight, which is another problem.
That was definitely a low light of the season, but let's look at your highlight of your big moment. I think the big moment for Bellator was Curran Strauss 3. I thought that was a tremendous fight. I thought that was the best fight of the season. I think you can mark it down as potentially fight of the year, and you can even mark it down as a finish of the year. I mean, he goes in there in the 5th round and gets that rear naked choke to defeat Daniel Strauss to re-get his title back. I mean, that's pretty excellent. He did in front of his hometown crowd, or, well, basically his hometown crowd in Hammond, Indiana, just outside of Chicago, where he lives and trains. I don't think you could have really asked for a better night for Bellator, and that's probably the highlights of the season, the highest of the highs of the season. And like you said, a lot of little mistakes for this season, but there was a little diamond in the rough there, I think, with that fight, and really just that event overall.
Yeah, that was where the welterweight tournament started. The Juice had great seats for that. Right there, smack dab in the center of press row. And, yeah, it was pretty amazing to see that live. Curran had to come out and got the finish, and got his belt back. I was there when he beat Warren, and it was twice as loud when he beat Strauss to recapture the belt. So that was definitely the highlight of the season. That and seeing the amazing welterweight tournament live and in person.
Well, going back since we've done the show, I think we started really covering around Bellator season 7, and season 7 wasn't that great because they were really setting up for season 8. Season 8 was amazing, arguably the best season Bellator's ever had. Season 9, not as much of a letdown, but a little bit of a letdown. It was going to be hard to top season 8. And now in season 10, Dave, I think this is their third season now on Spike. We have seen their worst season on Spike. I think we all gave Bellator season 10 like an A or A plus. Season 9 probably like a B minus. But this, Dave, honestly, season 10, I think you could make a case if you had to give it like a letter grade, you could give season 10 a D, to be honest, like a C minus or a D. And I'll go harsh. I'll be the harsh one here, and I'll give them a D because I just don't see how this season was that great. I know Bjorn Remedy might try to spin it like it was, but at the end of the day, it just wasn't a great season. And I think maybe because it wasn't a great season, we'll see a very excellent season 11. It just kind of seems like that's the way the seasons have been going for Bellator. You had a couple bad ones here, and then we should see a really good one for season 11, or at least that's my thinking anyway.
It's that little talk right there, Jim. It got my question back that I was going to ask earlier. What you're absolutely right. I would say C minus D type grade, but the problem that I think that they're having is, like you said, they're gearing up for seasons that are coming up. They're gearing up for the summer series. Just let the fights happen as they may. They're trying to script it, is what it feels like. I know the fights aren't scripted, but they're trying to put out what they need to put out. For instance, the Ill Will Brooks that just won the belt, he's got a great story, a great, heartwarming story that people need to know. They put it out there at the beginning of the last tournament that he was in, and they've never reran it. Let's learn about these guys, not just throw fights out. I understand when they come on Spike. They never did this before, Jim, but when they're on Spike and they come on, there's already two guys in the ring, and they start announcing them right away. There's very little lead up to know who these two guys are. Me and you know who they are. All of our friends who watch the show and stuff, they know who they are. But the casual observers, oh, look at these two guys that are just getting ready to fight. Give us a little bit of time, build up these fighters, so that when we look at the summer series and we see, let me find a name here. Sam Orpereza, he's fighting. I got to watch that guy. That guy was a Marine, or that guy was this. To make a connection with the crowd and, build it up for the upcoming seasons. But my one question that I wanted to throw to you was, do you think Bellator kind of dropped the ball by not having a show the week after the pay-per-view? And the reason I ask is just to kind of take like the WWE does. WrestleMania is on Sunday, but then there's a Raw on Monday to kind of show what happened the previous night and to kind of advance. I don't want to say the storylines, but just so that the people who didn't order it see what they missed, type of thing. Because it's going to end up being almost 3 weeks before they put a show on.
I don't think it would have been a bad idea to have a show after the pay-per-view. Maybe it's a little bit of a missed opportunity, but once again, I think they wanted like an end to the season, and that was to cap it all off, to say, all right, this has been season 10, we're going to take a little bit of break and come back for our summer series. And I think that's why they didn't do it. And I think it would have been nice because you maybe would have been able to have those season culminating tournaments. You maybe might have been able to have the welterweight. You maybe might have had the middleweight. You know what I mean? You might have been able to throw a couple of fights at the end of the day in there to kind of really end the season. But I think they went just about 12 consecutive weeks, like as a crew and all that. I think they just wanted some time off. And I think that more so than anything, just taking a week off and how much they looked at the fact that the UFC had a big pay-per-view that weekend and figured, well, let's not get into that. I don't know how much that had to do with anything, but it seemed like the right time to take a break. If you were going to take a break, I think that was a good time.
Fair enough.
Well, speaking of the UFC, let's talk about their latest pay-per-view here inside of round number 3, brought to you by our good friends at MMAforlife.ca. You can follow them on Twitter @_MMA for Life. I'm Jim Graham alongside Dave Sadler here for Beyond the Cage, presented by Fight Chicks, as we are live right now on YouTube. And of course, if you're watching part of it live, or you come in late, or you already left, it's going to be available still for download and stuff on all the normal podcast ways. So don't feel like, oh, I missed it live, I'm not going to be able to listen to Beyond the Cage this week. No, we're going to put it out. You'll have a chance to listen to what we're doing live here on Wednesday afternoon, so don't worry. I got you covered, and Dave got you covered. So inside of round number 3, like I said, we'll break down the main card of UFC 173, which was this past weekend on pay-per-view from Las Vegas. And let's look over the first fight of the evening. It was at 155 pounds as James Krause took on Jamie Varner. And Dave, we saw a very excellent fight. Unfortunately, it only lasted 5 minutes between Krause and Jamie Varner. And even though Varner, it looked like, I believe, broke his ankle, I think that was the injury. I might be wrong. You can correct me, Dave, on that in a second here. But that aside, Varner and Krause definitely brawling each other, going back and forth, but you could tell the difference was the size of Krause. Krause, a lot bigger than Jamie Varner, had that height and reach advantage, and had this fight gone on, I think that would have been a continual problem for Varner trying to land the powerful shots that he's capable of, as Krause was really able to kind of figure out after that initial rush and that initial first couple minutes that Varner's going to have to really come inside and really try to make a run to hit me. And I think Krause learned that very early, started throwing some really nice kicks. He landed a nice push kick to the face. And, you add in the ankle, which could have been stemming from a leg kick, which Joe Rogan asked Krause about after the fight. But even though it lasted 5 minutes and the injury did kind of mar it a little bit, I thought Krause looked really good. And for Jamie Varner, another exciting performance. It doesn't end well for him, but I think Varner has to move down to 145, Dave. I think after this fight, it's apparent that I'm not sure if he's big enough anymore to hang with some of these guys at 155. I mean, James Krause is huge, and Jamie Varner looked pretty small in comparison.
Yeah, Jim, when Jamie Varner came back, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but the fight that he took when he returned back to the UFC was on very, very, very short notice.
Yes, and it was against Edson Barbosa.
Yeah, but he was able to win that one early in the first, and just kind of overwhelmed Barbosa. And then, his fight against Lozon. Lozon's not a huge 155er. And then he actually, in that one, that was when he got fight of the night, fight of the year, the whole 9 yards. But the guys that he's fought since then, Melvin Gillard, Gleason Tebow, Abel Trujillo, and Krause, like you said, he's just not that big. Yeah, 45 is where he needs to be. I think he can be a force at 45.
I think so too. I mean, really, with the exception of Lozon, all those guys are huge. I mean, Barbosa's a beast. I mean, Trujillo's a beast. Krause is, yeah, we all know Tebow cuts from like 190. I mean, and Melvin Gillard has fought a lot of his career at 170, so he's a stocked 155 too. I mean, he's not taking on small dudes. And I think for Varner, once he gets this ankle healed up, I would consider that moving down to 145. And it's not the fact he's not exciting or, he can't compete with these guys, but to get to a championship level, something he has captured, a WEC championship, he just can't do it against some of these guys. I mean, he's going to just, some of these guys are just so big, and I think that might be something he consider, because I think he can give a lot of people at 145 a run for their money, and I think that's something that he can consider. I don't know how much weight he cuts, Dave. I don't, he's not what's the one I'm looking for? He has muscle mass, but he's not like overly ripped, so I can't imagine him cutting that much weight. And I think he can do it, and that's something he'll, I think, have to look at. And I think that was apparent in this fight. And had it gone on 15 minutes, could he get the victory? I think so, but I think Krause was figuring things out pretty quickly, and I think that was a very nice bounce back victory for him.
Jim, we should just cancel this show and become managers, because we've got great ideas.
We do have some great ideas. So
Joe Silva, you can quit your job. Sean Shelby, anybody who manages fighters, just, we got it. We're in it. We got it, Jim, because you know why? We're money.
Yes, we are. And let's move on to the next fight of the evening as Take Mizugaki took on Francisco Rivera. And surprisingly, Dave, Mizugaki stood a lot more with Rivera than I thought he would. And when it was all said and done, Mizugaki outstruck Rivera slightly, 67 to 61. Rivera actually had more takedowns than Mizugaki. He was 3 of 4 in his takedown attempts, but Mizugaki was able to land several shots that knocked down Rivera, where he was able to get on top and have a lot of ground control. And officially looking at the ground strikes, he outstruck Rivera 17 to 2 on the ground. And I think we saw a nice evolution of Mizugaki in this fight. Now, once again, it was a decision victory. That's what he does. He gets decision victories. But I didn't really think it was boring, and I think the fact that he went in there, took the best from Rivera, was able to dish out some punishment of his own, and once again, not land a takedown and still dominate a fight, I think that's showing a guy growing leaps and bounds, Dave, and I don't know if he'll get an immediate title shot, because I'm sure Sun Xiao, coming off the injury, will most likely get the next title shot, but Mizugaki is starting to look kind of like a complete fighter, Dave, and I think this was the next step in kind of his evolution here and taking on a very tough guy in Francisco Rivera.
Yeah, Jim, I have to give you some information here. I transferred from the couch to Buffalo Wild Wings after the Varner fight because I heard there were very few people, and my buddy Aaron, who's watching, what up, Aaron? He wanted to go to B-Dubs, so we went to B-Dubs, and I didn't get to see this fight, so I only saw the highlights of this fight. I agree with what you said because I went back and read. Mizugaki's looking like a more complete fighter. He wants a title shot. I think that he's on his way to a title shot. Another solid victory, I think, can get him in the, on the forefront of that title shot, but I just don't think it's going to be right now. And then I have a question for you. Do you think that Dana White hates this guy because it's almost like Mazzagatti?
Could be. I don't know, but I think one of the reasons he does like him is he doesn't have a lot of finishes, and I think that's really the only knock on him is that he just doesn't get a lot of finishes. I mean, not just in the UFC. You look over his career when we did the rundown for this fight, Dave, the majority of his wins are by decision. Now, that's not to say he didn't try to go out there and finish Rivera, because I think he did, but he's just the guy that I don't know if he lacks killer instinct, but he doesn't have the knockout power. I think that's apparent, but it just doesn't seem like he's going out there and getting the finish, and I think that always, at least in the UFC's mind, is always going to kind of put you a little lower on the priority list of asserting you to top contender status.
Jim, I got a question. Did you watch the undercard at all?
I have not watched the undercard yet. It's still sitting on the DVR.
All right.
I've not been able to get to it.
I'm sure you've seen the results. You've seen the results?
I have the results in front of me.
Okay. Tony Ferguson defeated on the undercard. He defeated Katsunori Kikuno. Is it out of the thought of possibility that Tony Ferguson needs a top 15 guy in his next fight? He looked, I know it was against a kind of an unknown name, but he looked really impressive in that fight, and you can go back and watch it, but he looked leaps and bounds better than when he won the Ultimate Fighter. And I texted a few people after that fight. I was super impressed with Ferguson, and I definitely think we'll see him on a main card pretty soon.
Real quickly, I like to see Tony take on Darren Cruikshank. I think that would be a pretty good fight. And both kind of have some Michigan ties. Now, I don't know if they're playing a card here in Michigan anytime soon, but, it kind of creates some little bit of a, storyline there, the fact that Ferguson has spent some time in Michigan. Of course, we all know Darren started Michigan top team in Detroit, so, you got a little bit of a thing you can play on there, too.
Yeah, that would be good. Neither one of them's in the top 15. That could push one of them there. But, yeah.
And we know Darren, he's not a guy, I'm pretty sure if Darren got offered that fight, I don't see how he says no.
Right.
Yeah. You know what I mean? He doesn't seem like the type of guy that really says no to anything. So.
Yeah, they're sorry to go off on a tangent. That was my that was um, my undercard MVP of the night.
No, it was definitely a great performance by him. When you saw some Ultimate Fighter winners do good. I mean, you had Michael Chiesa, Tony Ferguson, and Chris Holdsworth, all former Ultimate Fighters winners, won on UFC 173.
Yeah, and what about the main event too, Ultimate Fighter?
Yeah, Ultimate Fighter runner-up. You also had Sam Sicilian and Vince Peichel, who were also on seasons of the Ultimate Fighter win. The
And
only other
Ally.
guy, yeah, the Ally Quinta was the only guy that didn't win that was a member of the Ultimate Fighter.
It's crazy.
Well, let's get to the next fight of the evening, which is in the welterweight division as Robbie Lawler took on Jake Ellenberger. Now, we talked about Lawler a little bit earlier, and we know what's next for him, but looking at his most recent performance, Dave, I hate to say it was more Ellenberger being bad, but Robbie Lawler was good. Don't get me wrong. He was tremendous, but Ellenberger looked as bad as I think we've seen him in the octagon. And this is including his last fight against Rory McDonald. And it wasn't until the third round, Dave, that he started to amp things up and look like the Jake Ellenberger we all know, and why just about everybody is a fan of this guy. Because he goes in there, he rushes forward, he throws big power shots, he goes for big power takedowns, he can control and damage, he's active. But what we saw in those first two rounds, Dave, was a guy that just, I don't know if he was just looking to counter or Robbie Lawler was really hurting him bad and, he couldn't, figure out a way to counter, or his conditioning was bad. He was trying to conserve energy. I'm not really sure what his game plan was or what his thought process was while he was in the cage in the first 10 minutes, but Robbie Lawler got to do whatever he wanted to. Robbie Lawler was throwing combinations, he was getting close, he was throwing kicks, and Jake Ellenberger wasn't giving anything back. And like I said, not to take away from his performance, but if Jake Ellenberger does what he does in that third round, and of course now he did get finished, let's not get it twisted here. Robbie Lawler pulls off the knee combination finish there to get the victory, but if we see what Ellenberger brings to the table in the third round, the first two rounds, I think it's a little bit of a different fight.
Yeah. If ifs and buts were candy and nuts, every day would be Christmas too, right? I mean, when you're down 0-2, I mean, you have no choice but to come firing back. I like Jake Ellenberger. I've met him a couple times and couldn't be a nicer guy. And I just think the upper echelon is just a step above Jake Ellenberger. I mean, if you go and you see the guys that he's beat, I mean, when he got to the likes of like Martin Kampman, Rory McDonald, Robbie Lawler, they're all losses. And I mean, that's not saying that that's bad. What is he rank? What was he ranked? Like 6 or 7? Being the 6 or 7 best welterweight in the world isn't a bad thing. I just think, I mean, now he's at the point where he needs to make some decisions, and whether it be like maybe switch up a training camp, go get some advice from some other people, do something. But Ellenberger's a likable guy, and the other thing is Robbie Lawler's running through everybody right now. I mean, he took the champion and was, a minute and a half away from victory, if he didn't gas out. So losing to Robbie Lawler is not that big of a deal because everybody's doing that.
And for Robbie Lawler, he put together a great performance, and you could also make the argument that maybe Lawler didn't allow Ellenberger to counter. He used his range well. He was doing a lot of output to keep Ellenberger off balance, and it's a suitable point, but at the end of the day, Ellenberger didn't show up. And like you said, he's going to have to change some things around, and I don't know if it's a conditioning thing, Dave, or he has to learn to kind of stand up there, maybe not throw 100% into every shot, maybe take a page out of Matt Brown's book, throw a little more punches and bunches, take a little zip off of them, but he doesn't have to completely change his game, but he has to change something if he wants to get to the upper echelon like Robbie Lawler has.
Hey, Jim, you think when you watch that fight, the last time that we saw Jake Ellenberger in the cage was July of 2013. Do you put any stock into that?
I do. I put a little stock into that. It's been a while since he had been in the cage, but
in that same time period, Robbie Lawler was in the cage 5 times.
Well, he's more comfortable. Once again, you got to show up, regardless of what
Right.
You know, you can't just sit there and circle around and throw, 2 shots when the other guy's throwing 20. You got to do something. I think Joe Rogan said it's better to go out, giving it your all and maybe you get caught than kind of trying to be conservative and looking bad and maybe having to go all 15 minutes. And I think that was maybe the case for Ellenberger there a little bit.
Hey, Jim, before we get to the co-main event, you see that shirt right there?
Yes.
That's a selfless plug right there. And actually, I just got a text question in, so wait 1 second before we go to the co-main event. You're stalling for time right now.
Naturally, of course. I'm not stalling for time. Well, setting up the co-main event of the evening, of course, Daniel Cormier took on Dan Henderson, and boy, I tell you what, this fight was just domination by Daniel Cormier. I mean, he's just simply a bigger guy. I mean, Dan Henderson typically weighs in almost exact the limit, but weighed in 199. He's never been a big light heavyweight, but coming up against the guy who has routinely weighed 240 pounds in the heavyweight division, it was going to be a lot for him to try to stop Daniel Cormier. And we kind of mentioned in the lead-up, Dave, if Jake Shields, a guy who's fought a lot of his career at 170, could go in and handle Dan Henderson, what would a guy like Daniel Cormier do? And that's what he did. I mean, he dominated him with wrestling. I mean, he's just a bigger guy. He's a stronger guy. I mean, you saw some things you probably shouldn't see with two guys that are supposed to be fighting at light heavyweight. You shouldn't see that level of, physical prowess over the other man. And that's what we saw. And, Daniel Cormier, for his credit, he went in there and got the finish. That's something that's tough to do. Dan Henderson's a very tough dude, even at this age, to go in there and get the finish. And, we know he's not getting the shot right away, but it looks like he has to take on John Jones. I mean, I think that's the next form. I mean, he's now 5-0 in the UFC. He's undefeated his career, 15-0. He's beaten top guys at 2 different weight classes. His next chance is for a shot at the title. I think that's safe to say.
Yeah, I don't agree with Dana and his thoughts on what fighters should or shouldn't do that often. Daniel Cormier should fight somebody. Does he deserve the title shot? Yeah. Do you remember Jones was out forever after the last fight against Gustafsson? And so that fight took place on May 25th. There's a legitimate there's legitimate concern that Cormier Jones might not happen till May of next year. That's a long time, and then you're going to step in there with the best light heavyweight, arguably ever. I don't like it.
Well, I would say that fight happens no earlier than New Year's Eve. At least Cormier getting a title fight, because if it looks like it'll happen August 30th, you'd have September, October, November, and then if it's New Year's Eve, you would have roughly 4 months in between that, right? I would say that's about the earliest it goes, and that's not including any type of medical suspensions, how that fight goes, whether it goes 25 minutes, how much recuperation. So to me, the earliest that fight could happen would be New Year's Eve for Cormier getting his title shot, which, as of right now, is not that bad when you think about it. 6 months, that's not that long a wait, especially if you're getting a shot at the title. But yeah, if it's not gonna happen until middle of 2014, then maybe Cormier books another fight. Again, it's up to him. I mean, if he wants to wait, that's fine. But if he doesn't, he can more than well book him a fight. But not everything always times out right, and sometimes it sucks. But that's kind of where he's at right now.
Yeah, I wanted you to notice that I was wearing my Vigilante MMA Ultimate T-shirt.
Nice.
Did you notice that?
I did.
And look at this. I just received a drink, and what did I get here? Anyway.
All right.
Did I throw you off your game, Jim?
A little bit. No. You said we had another question coming in?
No, that was the owner and sole proprietor of VigilanteMMA.com was curious as to why my shirt attire wasn't
Oh,
No.
okay. All right. Okay. All right. Well, let's get to the main event then of UFC 173 as TJ Dillashaw took on Renan Barão. And Dave, I went back and listened just so I remembered exactly what I said. And I was just about right. I said if TJ Dillashaw wanted to beat Renan Barão, he had to keep up the pressure. And after the fight and in interviews, that's what he said, that was the key. And that was something that his good friend and training partner, Uriah Faber, didn't do in either of his two fights against Renan Barão. And I think that experience watching, his good friend and mentor, Uriah Faber, go up against Renan Barão and get destroyed twice, you kind of see, man, what would I have done? What can I do differently, if I got to face that guy? And I think TJ Dillashaw took all of that, with Dwayne Bang Ludwig and put together a game plan that could beat this guy. And that's what happened out on Saturday night. I think in the first round, I definitely would have gave to DJ Dillashaw. He had Barão hurt, just wasn't able to come up with the finish. Barão was able to kind of go in there and hang on. Round number 2, I thought Barão kind of got his wits back a little bit. I would have gave him round number 2. And then around number 3, it was going to look like another close round. But right towards the end, Barão had kind of motioned to the referee that he got poked on the eye. The referee didn't say anything. Dillashaw took advantage of that and kind of pounced on him. I think really kind of hurt him there towards the end of the round. And I think that really was the point where the fight went to TJ Dillashaw. Because then in the 4th round, Barão didn't look the same. We saw Dillashaw still keeping up the pressure, still keeping right in Barão's face. He was able to knock him down again, get the fight to the ground, be on top, land significant damage. Another area, again, Barão has submissions, but another area I think is a weakness of his is being on his back. I don't think he's as strong. We saw the powerful and strength of Dillashaw be on top. And then in round number 5, I think after kind of that horrible 4th round, I don't think Barão was able to recover. At that point, I don't think he was going to go out there and get a submission, and Barão's not a one-punch knockout power guy. I think it was going to be hard for him to go out there and do something that was going to stop Dillashaw at that point, who I think had built up a lot of confidence. And then we saw Dillashaw able to go in there, get the kill, land some power, and this kind of reminds me a little bit of when Condit fought Diaz, because we saw a guy get a game plan together, the perfect game plan to beat a guy who can be very tough, and Dillashaw was able to follow his game plan to a T, go out there and get the finish and shock the world. I mean, he was one of the heaviest underdogs in a title fight, and maybe not quite Sarah GSP, but I think it's on that level, Dave, of the upset. And Dillashaw was able to beat a guy who hadn't lost in like 6 years, who hadn't lost in like 34 out of 35 fights. Very impressive victory for TJ Dillashaw. And let's not forget, this was his 12th MMA fight, Dave. And he was able to capture the bantamweight championship of the world and just looked excellent in the process.
Yeah, Jim, I'm not even going to go into the fight. You did a pretty good job of nailing it. TJ dominated pretty much the whole fight. His movement was sick. I love when this stuff happens because, as much as, Dana was like, Renan Barão hasn't lost this, this, and this, and he was throwing numbers out there all week leading up to the fight, and they were over-emphasizing. See how I overemphasize that? That was neat. Like how great Renan Barão was, so that people would buy the pay-per-view. I wish just book the fights and put them on TV, because, I mean, my Facebook, yours probably the same, Twitter, was blowing up. Once the first round was over, it was blowing up. I had people, Jim, I had one of my staff sergeants from when I was in the Marine Corps, haven't talked to the guy in 5 years. The day after the fight, I had a 6-hour conversation with the guy about MMA, about the fights, because he saw me Facebooking and I saw him Facebooking about it, and we ended up talking. When you book good fights with good people like Renan Barão and TJ Dillashaw, you're going to get magic, and that's what we got to see on Saturday night.
It was an excellent fight. TJ Dillashaw put together the perfect game plan. I think, to be honest, Dave, I think Barão takes on Mizugaki next. And I think the winner of that gets a title shot, and we see Asuncia Dillashaw 2. That's what I think's next for the bantamweight division. What do you think?
My thoughts are this. Now that he doesn't have the belt, I think Barao moves up. Even though Aldo has the belt and they're teammates, I still think he moves up. Um, which I don't know who I would put in with Mizugaki right away, but I definitely think that Dillashaw's gonna. Who was the guy Dillashaw's gonna fight? You thought?
Oh, Sun Xiao. I
Yeah,
think that's
Sun
going to
Xiao.
happen because
Yeah,
remember Dillashaw filled in for him.
correct. Yeah,
So
yeah. So I think that title fight happens, but I think that Barao goes up a weight class.
okay, all right. Well, let's go to round number 4 here on Beyond the Cage, presented by Fight Chicks. Inside of round number 4, brought to you by our friends at MMAFreak.com. Follow them on Twitter at MMAFreakout. We're going to break down, or preview rather, the main card for UFC Fight Night 41. And Dave, real quickly, because we're trying to be as quick as we can live. This will be one of 2 fights that will be this Saturday by the UFC. You have this one, which will be shown on Fight Pass. Now, I know it will be earlier in the evening, but it's still on the same day, Saturday, May 31st. And then later in the evening, we have the Ultimate Fighter 3 Brazil finale. Now, because not everybody watched the Ultimate Fighter Brazil, which, again, speaking of Fight Pass, was only on Fight Pass, at least for fans here in North America, do you think they should have switched up what was on Fight Pass? Because I think they should have put the Brazil card on Fight Pass and should have put this one on Fox Sports 1. And that's how it should have been for 2 Saturdays. The one's different time zones, and maybe that's why they switched. But I think more people would be excited about tuning into this because it's a little more generic. Because when you say, hey, tune in this Saturday, Fox Sports 1 Ultimate Fighter Brazil 3 finale, you might go, I didn't watch the Ultimate Fighter Brazil. Why would I tune into the finale?
Correct.
And that's my thinking anyways. I don't mind there having 2 fights. I think it's interesting. We'll see how the numbers go, but I think they should have switched around what was online and what was on TV.
Yeah. Maybe the thought process was maybe they thought, the people who watch the Ultimate Fighter Brazil clearly have Fight Pass. So no, that's wrong. I screwed that up. Because Ultimate Fighter is on Fox Sports 1. Yeah. The Ultimate Fighter should have been on Fight Pass, and the Germany should have been on Fox Sports 1. So I'm in complete agreement with you, and that's why you're the host.
And also, I just think, if it was still Stipe JDS, that should be the fight on TV. But it's not Stipe JDS anymore. And to me, Mousasi Munoz is a lot more intriguing of a matchup because you have 2 guys that are in the top 10 instead of one guy in the top 10 versus a guy moving up from another weight class on short notice. I think that's the original booking. When you look at that, it makes sense, but maybe they should have shuffled around once it got changed. But whatever. All right, well, let's get to the fights here for Fight Night 41. The first fight of the evening will be in the featherweight division as Tom Ninamaki will take on Nicholas Bäckström, as we have a Finn versus a Swede. So we know there's kind of a rivalry there. So that should be interesting to see. And looking at Ninamaki, he is 1-0 in the UFC. He is currently overriding a 12-fight winning streak. In his UFC debut, he defeated Hani Yahya at the Ultimate Fighter 18 finale, and 8 of his 21 career victories are by submission. Looking at Bäckström, the Swede, he is making his UFC debut. He's riding a 5-fight winning streak, and 4 of his 7 victories are by knockout. Now, I don't know a lot about Bäckström, and like I said, swing feet. I don't know if that makes a difference in the matchup. National pride on the line and all that stuff. But we'll see what he brings to the table. It looks standing up like he may have a little more prowess there. But Ninamaki went toe-to-toe with a guy who's a very talented individual in Hani Yahya and was able to come out victorious in his UFC debut. And he's riding a 12-fight winning streak. So I think Ninamaki is the favorite here. I think it'll be interesting to see what these 2 bring to the table. 2 European guys, they're fighting in Germany. They put them on the main card here to give them a shot. So we'll see what happens. Should be an interesting fight, but I would favor Ninamaki, I think.
Yeah, I would favor Ninamaki as well. He's his nickname's the Stone Face, and I'm a big fan of that. So I'll use that for my reasoning for the pick. But as I'm looking at UFC.com, and I see Ninamaki and Bäckström, always remember, and I'm only saying this because Bäckström doesn't have a photo. It's a photo of our good friend Brian Ebersol. he's the to-be announced fighter. Always remember, just because you don't know the guy doesn't mean he doesn't have something up his sleeve. Because this is Backstrom's shot, main card, UFC, relatively close to home. So Ninamaki may be the big favorite, but don't count Backstrom out, man.
The next fight of the evening will be in the middleweight division as Luke Barnett will take on Sean Strickland. Looking at Barnett, he is 3-0 in the UFC. His last fight was a victory over Mats Nielsen at Fight Night 38, and 6 of his 8 career victories are by finish with 3 knockouts and 3 submissions. Looking at Strickland, he is 1-0 in the UFC and undefeated in his career. His last fight was a victory over Bubba McDaniel at UFC 171, and 7 of his 14 career victories are by knockout. Now, this is a curious booking, Dave, because, as I mentioned, Barnett's now 3-0 in the UFC, so you think he get maybe a little higher than competition. He's taking on Strickland here, who, again, 14-0 in his career. That's pretty impressive. 1-0 in the UFC, half his victories by knockout. I think if he can get on the inside of the long and tall frame of Barnett, he may have a chance to knock him out. Barnett has sometimes been able to show some openings because he doesn't have the fastest hand speed. And I think his nickname is the Big Slow, if I'm not mistaken. So that's an area that Strickland has to try to exploit to win. But for Barnett, you got to try to keep your head. And I know maybe he's not overestimating him, but I think Barnett, I would have liked to see someone in this 4 fight take on someone a little more of a known quantity, but that's the fight we get. He's here in, is in Europe. He's European. He's from England. Maybe that helps him out. Time zone. He doesn't have to fly or whatever. But it's an interesting fight. I would give a slight edge to Barnett because of his height and reach, and I think how many guys he's taken on in the UFC already. But for Strickland, he has knockout power. It's apparent that he has that, so he has a chance. And I think of the fights on this main card, I think I'm the most intrigued by this one because we're not really sure what we're going to get out of Sean Strickland, and we're seeing a guy who I think could be something at middleweight in Luke Barnett.
Hey, Jim, I'm trying to find online. Luke Barnett's reach is 78 inches. Do you have anywhere that shows Strickland's?
I don't think it shows it on the UFC website.
It doesn't.
Right? Okay, I didn't think it did. Yeah, well, I don't think it's 78. So I would conservative estimate, just looking at, I believe he's 6'3".
Yeah, he has. Think about when you think. When you think of Luke Barnett, Jim, I just did some quick looking. Him and Francis Carmont have the same reach. Francis Carmont seems like a huge middleweight, and I don't think Strickland's got that big of a reach that Barnett does.
I'm guessing like 73.
Yeah, and 5 inches. I mean, it might not sound like a lot, but that's for a reach, that's quite a bit.
And Barnett knows how to use it. It's not like he's going in there brawling fight, going into the pocket. He realizes that he has an advantage in that category over just about anyone in this division. He has learned to use it, and that that's the thing. If you got reach, but you got to know how to use it, and Barnett definitely knows how to use it.
Yeah, and the other thing too is he can use his legs too.
Mm-hmm.
Barnett. He's very good at utilizing, which clearly that reach is going to be even longer with his legs too. I think that Luke Barnett is a ways away from top 10, top 15, but I think that he's putting it together nicely since his time on The Ultimate Fighter. This will be his fourth fight, and right?
Yeah, it'll be his 4th UFC fight. Yep.
His 4th UFC fight, and I think I don't think I'm going out on a limb here, but he's progressed very nicely. His first fight was against Colin Hart. It was a unanimous decision, and then he's had 2 finishes. So he's winning fights. He's being decisive in victory. He's not backing out of fights, and now he's on the main card of a UFC show. So things are moving in the right direction for Mr. Big Slow Luke Barnett.
Also at middleweight, CB Dalloway will take on Francis Carmont in the next fight of the evening. And Dalloway's had a little bit of a resurgence here of lately, winning 2 out of his last 3 fights. And looking at the overall specs at CB Dalloway, 8-5 overall in the UFC. As I mentioned, won his last fight over Cesar Fajeda at Fight Night 39, and 6 of his 14 career victories are by knockout. Looking at Carmel, 6-1 in the UFC. His last fight was his first loss in the organization to Jacare Souza at Fight Night 36, and 10 of his 22 career victories are by submission. Now, we talked about reach. Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit, but size. Carmel is arguably the biggest middleweight I've ever seen, and you know, Jacare came pretty darn close to being that size, but I think Carmel was a tad bigger. And Dalloway, he's not that big of a middleweight. And, you know, he's had a little bit of resurgence, maybe has a little slightly more knockout power than Carmel, but I just don't see how Dalloway deals with the size of Carmel. I really don't. I just don't see it, Dave. And, you know, he has a good camp. You know, he's a guy that does have a strong will. You know, he doesn't give up in fights. You know, I don't think he's going to be broken by Carmel, but this is just physically a bad matchup for him. It's a fight to get Carmel back on the winning track. That's what it is. I mean, he just recently rattled off 6 fights in the UFC victories, and I think it was 10 or 11 overall in his career, is to get him back on track. And I think for Carmel, maybe he can go in there and, you know, maybe this is a fight where he actually could show his stand-up if he wanted to and not feel like he can get dominated, because Dalloway's not going to dominate with his stand-up. So I think this is a fight where Carmel could actually, I hate to use the word play around, but he can try some different things, I think, because, you know, he's such a heavy favorite. I just don't see what Dalloway can do. And I'm not trying to take away and say Dalloway has no chance, but I think if you're, you know, Francis Carmel and you want to try some different things you've been working on, this is a fight where you can do that. You couldn't do that against Jacare Souza. You could do that against the CB Dalloway.
Yeah, I just hit on the points that you made. Yeah, I think this is definitely a fight to get Carmel back in the winning ways. Or, I'm sorry, to get Carmel. That come across, but Carmel.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, this gets Carmel back in his winning ways. CB Dalloway's got knockout power, as referenced by his last victory, but maybe not play around is the right word. Showcase his talents to the UFC is probably a little bit better. I could see him getting a top 5 guy with a very dominant performance in this fight.
Let's get to the main event of the evening, which will pit former Strikeforce light heavyweight champion Gegard Mousasi against Mark Munoz. Looking at Mousasi, he is 1-1 in the UFC. His last fight in his move down to the middleweight division, he lost to Lyoto Machida at Fight Night 36, and 18 of his 34 career victories are by knockout. Looking at Munoz, he is 8-4 in the UFC. His last fight, he also lost to that Lyoto Machida guy at Fight Night 30, and 6 of his 13 career victories are by knockout. If it stays standing, Munoz, he can knock out Gegard Mousasi, but I just don't think technically he has the skills of Mousasi in terms of distance, range, leg kicks, and hand speed. But if it goes to the ground, Mousasi on more than one occasion has been dominated by strong wrestlers, and he's facing a very strong wrestler in Mark Munoz, who can land some serious ground and pound. And if Mousasi can keep it standing, I think he can pick Munoz apart, and we know he can go 25 minutes. But if it goes to the ground, Munoz can not only win the fight, but he could end it quickly. He's a very hard guy to stop when he's on top of you, and that's really how it goes. Who can get the takedown and who can stop the takedown in this fight at middleweight?
Yeah, this is a very intriguing matchup. When you look at it's a main event, 5-round fight. I don't know who the 5-round plays into. My guess is Munoz. But this fight, it's kind of like, hey, it's time to step up. Who's gonna move to that upper echelon? Because we got currently with the UFC's rankings, you got Munoz at 7, Mousasi at 11. So it's time for somebody to take a big step up. Munoz wins, he probably gets up to number 5, I would assume. If Mousasi wins, he probably takes over number 7 and gets a big step up in competition. So, yeah, it's going to be a war of who can, like you said, who can determine where we're going to go and who's going to be in control. But this should be a pretty interesting 5-round fight. I would like it to go longer, 3, 4, 5 rounds, because I want to see, who's ready for that step up.
Well, we'll save our picks for this card combined with what we're going to talk about right here in round number 5 on Beyond the Cage, presented by Fight Chicks. As in the 5th round, we're brought to you by our friends at BluegrassMMA.com. You can follow them on Twitter at BluegrassMMA, where we're going to preview the Ultimate Fighter 3 Brazil finale card down in Sao Paulo, Brazil this weekend, once again on the same day as the Fight Night 41, Saturday, May 31st. 5 fights will be shown on the main card, Dave. And before we get to the 3 non-TUF fights, I really want to start with the TUF fights real quick to get them out of the way. Now, some websites and some other shows, they're going to shy away from picking these fights. But Dave and I, we might not know about these guys that fall in the Ultimate Fighter Brazil, but we're going to pick the fight. We're not going to shy away from it just because we don't know. If it's on a UFC main card, we pick the fight. And I hope everybody knows that, because if you go to some media outlets and they'll pick the main card, they won't pick these fights, or they won't pick fights where they don't know, guys. And I just want to let everyone know we don't care. We're going to pick the fights. What's the difference to us? We're not putting money on it, so why wouldn't we pick it? So we're picking the fights. And, if you look at our record and the picks on the podcast page, we do pretty well. So if you are looking for advice, we try to do our best in who we pick. And majority of the time, we got a winning percentage. So we're going to pick the fights. You want to bet on these ones, go for it. You want to do that sort of thing. So, we're going to get to the TUF fights first here. And looking at the TUF fights, you got one in the heavyweight division, and you also have one in the middleweight division. And let's look first, Dave. I think it's the heavyweight. Yes, the heavyweight final will be Vitor Miranda against Antonio Carlos Jr. Now, I think I've seen Miranda fight before. His name sounds really familiar. I don't know why, and it's not just because his first name is Vitor. He sounds familiar. He actually trains with the guys over there at like Black House, Team Nogueira. 9-3 in his career, 6 of 9 victories by knockout, and his opponent, Antonio Carlos Jr., is who we'll be taking on. He's 3-0 in his career. All 3 of his victories are by submission. So just looking off that, Dave, if it stays standing, it looks like Mariana's going to have the advantage. If it goes to the ground, it looks like Antonio Carlos will have the advantage. So should be intriguing. I don't know. We'll see what happens, I guess, in that one.
Jim, it's a little bit weird. The UFC.com has these guys listed. It has Miranda listed at 230, and it has Antonio Carlos Jr. listed at 218.
Yeah, and actually, if you go to Sheerdog, it lists both guys as light heavyweights, so they obviously moved up to heavyweight to get a shot on the show.
Oh, nice. Yeah, Jim, I'm not going to make any picks, but I'm just going to throw it out there that the nicknames of both of these guys, one is Cara de Sapato, and the other one is Lex Luthor. So I'll let you know who I'm going to pick in a minute.
His name is Vitor Lex Luthor Miranda. So obviously he relishes being the bad guy. I mean, yeah. Lex Luthor's. For people that I do like comics, and I'm more of a Marvel guy than a DC guy, but I think for DC villains, it's very hard to get better than Lex Luthor. I mean, the guy runs his own company, and he's a billionaire, but yet his sole mission in his life is destroy Superman. It's great. He's a very complex. He's a very interesting guy. If you ever read some stuff on Lex Luthor, definitely a great villain, and definitely yeah. So that right there gives you a little level of maybe what Vitor Miranda's thinking there. So looking at the middleweight final, Dave, we have Warley, I'm not sure, Warley Alves, and he will be taking on Marcio Alexandre, and also he's a junior too. Alexandre, I tell you what, Dave, he looks to be my favorite, and maybe a guy that might move down a weight class after the show, but how do you like 12-0 in his career? 10 of 12 victories by knockout, and the other 2 are by submission. So he's finished every single one of his opponents, and he's taken on Alves, who's 6-0 in his career, 3 submissions to his credit. And it looks like Alexandre normally trains with Thiago Tavares, who's had some time in the UFC. We'll do picks here in just a second, but it looks as though Alexandre is an animal. It looks like he has some killer instinct. I hate to pick favorites, but unless this guy gasses out, it looks as though I would give him a slight edge in this matchup.
Yeah, like you said, like you prefaced earlier, didn't know all these guys. Kind of hard to follow on Fight Pass and the whole 9 yards. But Yeah. Both guys have impressive records, but I think that this time on The Ultimate Fighter was their first big step up in competition. And yeah, I'll give you my pick in just a minute. But opportunity of a lifetime coming up this Saturday for these guys.
All right, the first non-tough fight, and I think it will open the card. We have former Ultimate Fighter Brazil winner Hani Jason Bareza will take on Robbie Peralta at 145 pounds. Looking at the former Ultimate Fighter winner Bareza, he is 4-1 in the UFC. His last fight was a victory over Steven Seiler at Fight Night 39, and 8 of his 14 career victories are by submission. Looking at Peralta, he is 3-1 with a no contest in the UFC. His last fight was a victory over Esteban Payan at UFC 168, and 13 of his 17 career victories are by knockout. Though Bareza won his last fight by knockout in the first round, whether or not that was a good stoppage or not, he showed that he does have a little power. But I don't think he really wants to stand with Robbie Peralta for any length of time. I don't think that goes very well for Hani Jason. So for Hani, he's going to have to try to get this fight to the ground. Now, Peralta doesn't have the best takedown defense, but once again, Jason's coming from a jiu-jitsu background, not a wrestling background. So it's not like he's great at takedowns. Once it gets to the ground, Hani Jason's going to have an incredible advantage, and wouldn't be surprised if he does something slick to get a submission. So Hani Jason's probably fought a little better competition, has that great jiu-jitsu pedigree, but the power of Peralta is something to be concerned about, and I think because Jason's been knocked out before, and sometimes, is a little bit of a slow starter, that gives Peralta an opening, and I think Peralta has to not go for broke in the first round, but I think he has to go that first round coming out the gates very strong, because I think if he tries to sit back and look for a power shot to contact, and get a knockout that way, I'm not sure if that's not how you're going to be Hani Jason with your stand-up. You got to be aggressive and be in his face.
Yeah, I think this is a perfect fight to start off the show. Clearly they've got they're looking for that excitement factor. Problems poses lots of problems, which is why that's his nickname. Robbie Peralta is going to come at you. Like you said, you don't want to stand with him, stand and bang with him. If it gets to the ground, clearly, like you said, it's Jason's fight to win. It's just, how's he going to get it there? If Robbie Peralta knocks him on his tail, that doesn't count as getting the fight to the ground. You know what I mean?
Hopefully Peralta's smart enough, if he does knock him down, to not go there. Just go, come on.
Yep. Knock him down, get back up. Remember those toys you used to hit them and they'd fall down and then bounce back up and then fall down?
Yeah.
That's what it's going to be like. But yeah, no, I think this is a very exciting fight to start off the card, and it's a very intriguing matchup. So yeah, stay tuned for my pick.
All right, at 170, Damian Maia. Now, I'm going to brace myself because I don't know if I'm going to get this name right, but Damian Maia is taking on Alexander Yakovlev?
Yep.
No, that's what I got. Anyways, Yakovlev making his UFC debut overall in his career, 21-4 with a draw, currently riding a 3-fight win streak, and has 16 career finish victories. Of those 21 wins, 8 knockouts and 8 submissions. Looking at Damian Maia, 12-6 in the UFC, riding a 2-fight losing streak. His last fight was a loss to Rory McDonald at UFC 170, and 9 of his 18 career victories are by submission. Now, Yakovlev looks like he has a lot of finishing skills. He hasn't fought in the UFC before, and he's taken on Damian Maia, who we all know can be really good. He can also kind of look bad like he did against Rory McDonald. And I don't know if it was all conditioning. I think it was some of the body shots that he took against McDonald that really just sapped his energy, and that's why he wasn't able to keep up a torrid pace and great takedowns like we have seen him since him dropping down to 170 pounds. I fully expect him to just go right at Yakovlev, take him to the ground, and probably get a submission. I really think he's going to go back to, because of the opponent too, he's going to go back to that old attacking style of Damian Maia we've seen before. And really for Maia, it's just a matter of one victory getting back in the top 10 in everyone's consciousness again. Because, yeah, he looked bad against Rory McDonald, but I think that's a fight he goes into again, even against McDonald. That's a fight he can win. I mean, like I said, he took a couple of bad shots to the body. I think it just completely took him out of the game. And I think that's something that he probably went back and tape, looked and go, all right, I can't take shots like that. I got to attack early and, not stand up with some of these guys. And Nikolev, he has to try to finish this thing early. Otherwise, it's going to be a long evening for him down there in Brazil.
Yeah, this is a terrible fight to make your debut against. Damian Maia has the ability to make lots and lots of dominant people look like rookies. I got to see Damian Maia fight Chris Weidman in Chicago a couple years ago. Chris Weidman's a pretty good wrestler, and he cut a bunch of weight going into that fight. And Damian Maia made Weidman work for 3 full rounds to get that victory. Even though he lost, he looked like I said, he made Weidman look like it was he was relatively new at the sport of grappling. And if Maia gets in a position, he's very heavy and he can stick to the Russian, and it'll be like you said, it'll be a very long and might not be overly exciting, but it'll definitely be a long night for the Russian.
The main event of the evening will be at heavyweight as Stipe Miocic will take on injury replacement Fabio Maldonado. Looking at Maldonado, he is 4-3 in the UFC, currently riding a 3-fight winning streak. Once again, he will be moving up from light heavyweight to heavyweight for this fight. His last fight was a victory over Jean Vellante at Fight Night 39, and 12 of his 21 career victories are by knockout. Looking at Stipe Miocic, he is 5-1 in the UFC, riding a 2-fight winning streak. His last fight was a victory over Gabriel Gonzaga at Fox 10, and 7 of his 11 career victories are by knockout. It's not going to be a long breakdown, Dave, because Miocic is bigger, he's stronger, he's taller, he's a legit heavyweight, and has beaten some of the best guys in this division already. I realize this is injury replacement. They wanted to keep Stipe on this card, but really Stipe has everything to lose in this fight. This fight, with a win, doesn't do anything for him. It doesn't move him up any more in the heavyweight division. He's still one signature victory away from getting a shot at the title. Most likely he'll have to face JDS again somewhere, down the road. But really, this is a fight for Stipe to just go in there and show his skills, I guess, to somewhat of an audience being a main event. Because Maldonado, he has a puncher's chance, I guess, but I just don't see what he offers to Stipe. It's just simply to keep Stipe in shape and give him another victory.
If Roy Nelson couldn't knock out Stipe Miocic, I don't think Fabio Maldonado is going to do it either. I agree with everything you just said. He's 1 fight away. He has to get that signature victory. Stipe does. Maldonado's not going to go away. It's also doing a pretty good solid for the UFC. And correct me if I'm wrong, is Maldonado on a losing? Did he lose his last fight or he won it?
No, he's actually on a 3-fight winning streak. But again, that's at 205 pounds.
Yeah, well, that keeps you in the good graces of the head cheese over there at the Zuffa headquarters. But I don't think this card could have gone on without this type of fight, and they really didn't have much other. They knew Stipe was healthy, and they got someone to step up, and that's the only reason we have that fight. And also to go along, you said he's a little bit taller. What else did you say? A little more
bigger, stronger.
I was gonna rap because you said something about he was a little bit taller, and I said, and he wants to be a baller and a shot caller.
Right, yeah. I know what you're talking about, right?
Anyway.
All right. Well, we won't have the running music, but we'll get to our picks here. We got 9 fights to pick.
Hey, Jim, wait. Hold on. Because we're here in the Beyond the Cage studios. Let me, hold on.
Oh.
Pride FC music.
Yeah, see if it will come through?
Yeah.
All right, David, we're going to try something here. And once again, we are live. Anything can happen live. We're going to try to get our running music here for picks. Let's see if we can queue up here live. Now, of course, if you listen to the podcast version, I could always add in the music anyway. But this is more entertaining, trying to get Dave to queue up the right music here for our picks.
Wait for it. All right. Oh, yeah.
I heard it.
For the first time ever, Jim, it's time for you to say it.
Let's cue the Pride music. That's all. It's not continuing.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, okay, there we go. All right, there we go. All right. Let's get to Fight Night 41 first, the first fight of the evening, featherweight division. Tom Ninamaki against Nicholas Backstrom. I don't know. It should be intriguing, but I'll go with Ninamaki in this one.
I'll take Ninamaki as well.
All right, at middleweight, Luke Barnett against Sean Strickland. We'll see what Strickland brings to the table. He looks like a promising prospect, but I'm going to go with the guy I know, and I'm going to take Luke Barnett to win this one.
It's the big slow for me.
Also at middleweight, Francis Carmon against CB Dalloway. Carmon's just such a big dude. I just don't see how CB Dalloway is able to deal with that size, so give me Carmon to win this one.
Are you serious? I have to pick him. Francis Carmon.
The main event of the evening in the middleweight division, Mark Munoz against Gegard Mousasi. I think we can see something very entertaining, Dave. I think we can see an excellent fight, but I'm going to go with the wrestling prowess of Mark Munoz. I think that's going to be the difference in this one.
Yeah, Munoz has been... Yeah, Munoz is my guy. The Filipino wrecking machine I'll go with.
All right, let's get to the Ultimate Fighter Brazil 3 finale card. Let's start first with the contract fights. At middleweight, we have Warley Alvarez against Marcio Alexandre. I'm going to go with the guy in Alexandre who we mentioned, 12 of 12 victories by finish. I'm going to go with that guy to win.
Yep, I'll go with him. I'll go with Leota. Nickname.
All right, let's go with Antonio Carlos Jr., Vitor Miranda, the heavyweight contract fight for the Ultimate Fighter finale card here. Miranda's nickname's Les Luthor, so that already put me kind of on his bandwagon, so I'm going to go with Vitor Miranda to win.
Yeah, you know, I like the Lex Luthor. I'm going to go out on a limb, though, and I'm going to take Carlos Jr. He's the smaller guy, and I think that he may be a little bit faster. And I'm going to use that for my pick.
All right, at featherweight, Hani Jason Bareza against Robbie Peralta. Robbie Peralta has a chance to win with the knockout, but I'm going to take the jiu-jitsu stylings of Hani Jason in this one.
The probability of problems walking out with his fist raised is going to be high, and I'm going to go with problems for the victory.
All right, at welterweight, Damian Maia, Alexandre Yakovlev. Feel sorry for Yakovlev. He probably is a very talented guy, but you got to take on Damian Maia. That's a tough task in his home country of Brazil, so give me Maia in this one.
Yep, Damian Maia.
Main event of the evening at heavyweight, Stipe Miocic and Fabio Maldonado. Like we said, Maldonado doing a solid, but moving up a weight class usually is never the greatest thing, Dave, and when you're moving up to heavyweight, probably even more so than any other weight class, he's going to have a tough time against the man from Ohio, so give me Stipe in this one.
I will take Stipe Miocic for the victory.
All right, well, that does it. Another live show and another show in the books for Dave and myself. Again, if you missed it here live on YouTube, don't worry, it will be available on the normal Stitcher platform and SoundCloud and iTunes and all that good stuff for the podcast. So thanks again for watching live, and we'll be back next week. I'm Jim Gramm. He's Dave Sadler, and thanks for watching to Beyond the Cage Live, presented by Fight Chicks.
Thank you, everybody.